The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty trading post as Ayanna pressed herself against the rough wooden fence, her heart hammering against her ribs. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd like thunder before a storm, each word driving deeper into her chest than the last. She clutched the torn hem of her buckskin dress, trying to make herself smaller, invisible, anything but the spectacle she'd become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The next lot includes prime cattle, 3 breeding sows, farm, tools, and his voice paused dramatically as his eyes found her cowering form. 1 Cherokee female, age 16, suitable for heavy labor. The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Men in worn hats pointed and whispered, their wives covering their mouths in mock horror while their eyes gleamed with malicious curiosity. Ayanna's cheeks burned with shame as she felt their stares crawling over her like insects. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, speaking of dignity and pride, but those words felt as distant as the mountain peaks of her homeland. Standing near the livestock pen, she could smell the fierce sweat of the animals mixed with her own. A calf lowered pitifully from its cage, and Ayanna understood its terror completely. They were both commodities now, reduced to their market value by men who saw flesh and bone rather than souls. Do I hear $20 for the lot? The auctioneer's gavel gleamed in the sunlight. $20. That's what her life was worth to these people. Less than what they'd pay for a decent horse. The events that led her here felt like scenes from someone else's nightmare. 3 months ago she'd been gathering herbs with her grandmother near their cabin in the Tennessee hills. The old woman had been teaching her the ancient ways, which plants healed fever, which roots eased childbirth pain, how to read the sky for weather changes. Ayanna had been clumsy then too, stumbling over roots, accidentally crushing delicate flowers in her large hands. Her grandmother never scolded her, only smiled and said that gentleness came from the heart, not the body. "Your spirit is beautiful, little bear," she would whisper, using the pet name that made Ayanna feel precious despite her size. The Creator made you exactly as you should be. But the Creator hadn't protected them when the soldiers came. Ayanna could still smell the smoke that had filled their small valley that terrible morning. The U.S. Army had arrived with papers and proclamations, speaking of Indian removal and the greater good of civilization. Her grandmother had stood in their doorway, ancient and defiant, refusing to leave the land where her ancestors were buried. "This is sacred ground," she had declared in Cherokee, then repeated in English for the pale-faced officer. "My bones will rest here with my fathers." The soldier had looked through her as if she were made of morning mist. "You have 3 days to pack. Anyone remaining will be forcibly relocated. 3 days to abandon a lifetime. 3 days to say goodbye to everything that made them who they were." Her grandmother had lived exactly 2 of those days. On the second night, the old woman had simply closed her eyes and chosen not to open them again. Ayanna had found her at dawn, peaceful as new snow, her weathered hands folded over the medicine bundle that contained their family's most sacred herbs. The funeral had been a rushed, hollow thing. No proper ceremony, no time for the 4-day vigil that honored the dead. Just Ayanna alone, digging a grave with her bare hands while soldiers watched impatiently from their horses. She'd whispered the old prayers as best she remembered them, her voice breaking as dirt covered her grandmother's face. "I'm sorry, grandmother," she sobbed. "I don't know all the words." By the 3rd day, she was truly alone. The soldiers had loaded her into a wagon with other displaced Cherokee families, but she knew none of them. They looked at her with the same uncomfortable mixture of pity and embarrassment that she'd grown accustomed to seeing. The fat Cherokee girl who couldn't keep up, couldn't fit into traditional clothes properly, couldn't find a husband despite her grandmother's gentle efforts at matchmaking. The journey west had been brutal. Women and children crammed into wagons that broke down daily, men forced to walk until their feet bled through their moccasins. Ayanna had tried to help where she could, lifting heavy supplies, tending to sick children, sharing her rations with nursing mothers. But her size made her slow, and her clumsiness often created more problems than it solved. "Move faster, girl," the wagon master had shouted when she'd struggled to climb down from the overcrowded cart. "You're holding up the whole train." When she'd slipped and fallen into a muddy creek while trying to gather water, the other women had to waste precious time helping her up and wringing out her soaked dress. She could see the frustration in their eyes, though they were too kind to voice it. She was a burden, and everyone knew it. The sickness had started in the 3rd week. Cholera swept through their group like wildfire, claiming the very young and very old first. Ayanna had nursed the afflicted as best she could, remembering fragments of her grandmother's teachings about healing herbs and clean water. But medicine was scarce, and hope even scarcer. When her meager supply of healing plants ran out, she'd traded her grandmother's silver, hair combs, the only valuable thing she owned, to a white trader for willow bark and sage. The trader had looked her up and down with calculating eyes, taking note of her youth and her obvious desperation. "Those combs ain't worth much," he'd lied smoothly. "But I'll tell you what, girl. I know someone who might have a strong back and a willing worker. Better than dying out here with the rest of them." She should have known it was a trap. Should have recognized the predator's smile that never reached his eyes. But she'd been exhausted, grieving, and terrified of dying alone on the trail like so many others. When fever struck their camp that night, killing 3 more children despite her efforts, the trader's offer began to seem like salvation. "Just need you to sign this paper," he'd said, producing a document written in English script she couldn't read. "It's an employment contract. Good work, regular meals, safe shelter. Better than what you got here." The pen had felt impossibly heavy in her hand. She'd stared at the meaningless symbols on the page, thinking of her grandmother's voice, telling her to be careful, to trust her instincts. But her instincts were screaming different things: run, hide, sign anything that might mean survival. She'd signed with shaking fingers, not understanding she was signing herself into bondage. The trader had taken her away that very night, while the sick moaned in their blankets and the healthy prayed for dawn. No one tried to stop them. She was, after all, a burden. One less mouth to feed. One less person slowing down their desperate march toward an uncertain future. Now she understood the true nature of the employment contract. She'd been sold, pure and simple. Sold like the cattle lowing beside her, like the pigs squealing in their pen. The trader had brought her to this frontier town in Arkansas's territory, where Cherokee girls apparently brought a decent price if you weren't particular about the legalities. $25, called out a voice from the crowd. Ayanna looked up to see a thin man with cruel eyes examining her like she was a horse he was considering purchasing. "But I want to check her teeth first." More laughter rippled through the gathering. A woman near the front called out, "What would anyone want with that much woman? She'd eat you out of house and home." "Plenty of work for her," the thin man replied. "Strong back, young enough to train properly. Might not be much to look at, but she'd do field work." Ayanna's throat constricted. Field work. She'd seen what that meant for Cherokee women sold into frontier farms. Endless labor under brutal conditions, worked until their bodies gave out, then discarded like broken tools. If she was lucky, she might last 5 years before the backbreaking toil killed her. $30. Another voice joined the bidding. Numbers climbed higher, and with each increase, Ayanna felt herself shrinking further into her own skin. These men weren't seeing a person with dreams and fears and a grandmother who'd loved her. They saw pounds of flesh, capable hands, a back strong enough to bear whatever burden they chose to place on it. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. Her grandmother's stories about the spirit world, where Cherokee ancestors watched over their descendants. Perhaps her grandmother was watching now. Perhaps she'd find peace in knowing that Ayanna would survive, even if survival meant this. The auctioneer's voice cut through her desperate prayers. I have $40. Do I hear 45? Silence stretched across the crowd. $40 seemed to be her ceiling, her final worth in this world of buyers and sellers. The thin man with cruel eyes stepped forward, reaching into his coat for his money pouch. That's when the shadow fell across her. Ayanna looked up, squinting against the morning sun, and saw a figure that blocked out the light completely. The man standing before the auction block was enormous, not fat like herself, but tall and broad like an oak tree given human form. His hair was dark as night, his skin weathered by outdoor work, and his eyes his eyes weren't cruel. She'd grown expert at reading cruelty in men's faces over these past terrible months. The hungry look of those who enjoyed causing pain, the cold calculation of those who saw her as an object, the disgust of those who found her very existence offensive. But this giant's eyes held something different, something she hadn't seen. Directed at her in so long she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. The giant's voice rumbled, like distant thunder as he addressed the auctioneer. $50. The crowd murmured in surprise. The thin man's face twisted with anger. 55. 75, the giant replied calmly, without hesitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A hush fell over the gathering. $75 was more than many of these frontier farmers made in a month. The thin man sputtered and cursed, but he didn't have that kind of money. No one did. Going once, the auctioneer called, clearly pleased with the unexpected windfall. Going twice. Ayanna stared at the giant, trying to understand what was happening. Why would anyone pay so much for her? What kind of work could possibly justify such an expense? Her mind raced through horrible possibilities, each worse than the last. Sold! The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The crowd began to disperse, some shooting curious glances at the giant who'd just spent a fortune on a Cherokee girl. The thin man spat in the dirt and stalked away, muttering about fools and their money. The auctioneer climbed down from his platform, eager to complete the transaction and count his commission. But the giant didn't move toward the money table. Instead, he approached Ayanna directly. Up close, he was even more imposing. She had to crane her neck to look at his face, and even then she felt like a child staring up at a mountain. His clothes were simple but well made: homespun shirt, leather vest, canvas trousers that had seen honest work. His hands, she noticed, were scarred but clean. My name is Samuel Hartwell, he said quietly, his voice gentle despite its deep timbre. I know you're frightened, but I'm not going to hurt you. Ayanna wanted to speak, to ask the 1,000 questions burning in her throat, but no sound came out. She'd forgotten how to be spoken to with kindness that Samuel seemed to understand. Her silence. He didn't press for an answer, didn't grab her arm to drag her away like she'd expected. Instead, he waited, patient as stone, while she processed what was happening. What's your name? He asked after a moment. Ayanna, she whispered, surprised to hear her own voice. Ayanna. He repeated it carefully, not mangling the pronunciation like most white people did. That's a beautiful name. She stared at him in wonder. When was the last time anyone had called anything about her beautiful? I have a farm about 10 miles north of here, Samuel continued. It's not much, but it's peaceful. Good land, clean water, plenty of food. You'll have your own room, and you'll be safe there. Safe, the word felt foreign to her ears. She'd almost forgotten what safety felt like. The auctioneer approached with papers to sign and money to exchange. Samuel handled the business quickly, efficiently, but Ayanna noticed he kept the legal documents. Whatever her status was now, he wasn't leaving her in doubt about the terms. "Can you ride?" he asked as they walked toward a waiting wagon. She shook her head. Horses had always been too expensive for her and her grandmother, and too small besides. Most couldn't carry her weight safely. "That's all right. The wagon's comfortable enough." He helped her up onto the bench seat with surprising gentleness, his large hands careful not to grip too tightly. "It's a bit of a journey, but we'll stop to rest whenever you need." As they pulled away from the trading post, Ayanna looked back at the livestock pens where she'd spent the night. The cattle were being loaded into their own wagons now, heading to whatever fate their new owners had planned. At least they would be kept together, she thought. At least they weren't alone. The road stretched ahead through rolling hills covered in oak and pine. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and new grass. For the first time in months, Ayanna allowed herself to take a full breath. "Are you hungry?" Samuel asked after they'd been riding for an hour. She was always hungry, but admitting it felt dangerous. What if food was a reward that had to be earned? What if showing appetite proved she was the greedy, gluttonous creature people believed her to be? Samuel seemed to read her hesitation. "I packed extra biscuits this morning. My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, always makes too much food. Says a man my size needs proper feeding, but even I can't eat everything she cooks." He reached into a basket behind the seat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. The biscuits inside were golden brown and still warm, with butter melting into their flaky layers. The smell made Ayanna's stomach clench painfully. "Please," he said, offering her one. It would be a shame to waste them. She took the biscuit with trembling fingers and bit into it carefully. It was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in months. Real butter, real flour, made with care by someone who understood that food could be love made tangible. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." They rode in comfortable silence after that, the wagon wheels turning steadily along the dirt road. Ayanna found herself studying Samuel's profile, trying to understand this strange turn her life had taken. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands on the reins were steady and sure, and he drove the wagon with the easy confidence of someone who'd traveled this route many times. But questions still haunted her. Why had he paid so much? What did he expect from her? When would the kindness end and the real purpose reveal itself? As if sensing her thoughts, Samuel spoke without taking his eyes off the road. "I suppose you're wondering what I want from you." Ayanna's heart began to race again. Here it comes, she thought. Here's where I learned the truth. "The honest answer is that I don't know yet," he continued. "I have a big house that stays too quiet, a farm that's more work than one man can handle, and a housekeeper who's been pestering me for months about needing help with the household tasks. But mostly ... He paused, considering his words. "Mostly, I saw you standing there, and I couldn't bear to let that thin fellow take you. You looked like you needed someone to care about what happened to you." Ayanna blinked back sudden tears. No one had cared what happened to her in so long that she'd forgotten it was possible. "I won't lie to you," Samuel said. "There'll be work to do. A farm doesn't run itself. But you'll be paid fair wages, you'll have time to rest, and you'll be treated with respect. That's a promise." The wagon hit a rut in the road, jostling them both. Samuel steadied the horses with gentle words and a firm hand, then glanced at Ayanna with concern. "You all right?" She nodded, though the simple question nearly undid her. When was the last time anyone had asked if she was all right? When was the last time her comfort mattered to another human being? The sun climbed higher as they traveled, warming the spring air and bringing out the green in the surrounding hills. Ayanna found herself noticing details she'd been too numb to see during her months of captivity. The way wildflowers dotted the meadows like scattered jewels, the sound of birds calling from hidden nests, the play of light and shadow across The landscape. It was beautiful here. Different from the mountains of her childhood, but beautiful in its own way. Rolling and soft where her homeland had been sharp and dramatic, but welcoming nonetheless. Tell me about where you came from, Samuel said after a while. If you want to, that is. Sometimes talking helps make sense of things. Ayanna hesitated. The story of her displacement was painful, full of loss and betrayal and choices that still haunted her. But something in Samuel's tone suggested he genuinely wanted to know, not out of curiosity or pity, but because he saw her as a person with a history worth hearing. Slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She told him about her grandmother, about the mountains of Tennessee, about the forced removal and the terrible journey west. She spoke of her grandmother's death, of signing the paper she couldn't read, of waking up in the livestock pen with no understanding of how her life had become a commodity to be bought and sold. Samuel listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. No one should have to endure what you've been through. No one should be treated like property. But I was sold, Ayanna said, voicing the fear that had been growing all morning. You bought me. Doesn't that make me your property now? Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop beside a clear stream that crossed the road. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious but kind. Listen to me carefully, Ayanna. You are not my property. You are not anyone's property. What happened back there was a legal transaction in the eyes of the law. But in the eyes of God and in my heart, you are a free human being who deserves dignity and respect. He reached into his coat and pulled out the papers from the auction. Without ceremony, he tore them in half, then in half again, letting the pieces scatter on the wind. There, he said simply. Now it's just two people agreeing to help each other. Out. Nothing more, nothing less. Ayanna stared at the torn papers blowing away across the meadow. Her throat felt tight, her chest full of something she couldn't name. It felt dangerous to hope, dangerous to believe that this kindness was real and lasting. But as she looked into Samuel's steady brown eyes, she thought perhaps her grandmother had been right about the spirit world after all. Perhaps the ancestors did watch over their children, guiding them toward the people who would help them remember who they truly were. The stream beside them bubbled and laughed as it flowed toward distant rivers, carrying the torn papers away like the remnants of a nightmare. Ahead lay Samuel's farm, a new life, and possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Ayanna felt something flickering in her chest that might have been hope. The Hartwell farm appeared in the distance, like something from a half-remembered dream. Rolling fields of young corn stretched toward wooded hills with a two-story farmhouse, sitting like a crown jewel among carefully tended gardens. Smoke curled from the chimney in lazy spirals, and chickens pecked contentedly in the yard. It looked nothing like the harsh, unwelcoming places Ayanna had imagined during the wagon ride. Home sweet home, Samuel said softly, though she caught something wistful in his voice. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged from the kitchen door, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair pinned back severely and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. This had to be Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper Samuel had mentioned. The woman's gaze swept over Ayanna with obvious curiosity, taking in her torn buckskin dress, her tangled hair, and her nervous posture. But unlike the cool assessment Ayanna had grown accustomed to, Mrs. Patterson's examination seemed more practical than judgmental, like a gardener evaluating soil quality rather than finding fault. "So this is the help you went to fetch," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping forward as Samuel helped Ayanna down from the wagon. "Lord knows we need it around here." "Mrs. Patterson, this is Ayanna," Samuel said. "She's had a rough time of it lately. I'm hoping we can make her feel welcome." The older woman nodded briskly. "Of course, come along, child. You look half-starved and completely worn out. First thing we do is get some proper food for you and find you decent clothes." Ayanna hesitated, unused to such immediate kindness from strangers. Mrs. Patterson noticed her reluctance and softened her tone. "Don't worry, dear. I may sound gruff, but I don't bite. Been keeping a house for Mr. Samuel here for 3 years now, and I've learned that the secret to a peaceful home is making sure everyone feels they belong. That includes you now." The kitchen was warm and inviting, with copper pots hanging from hooks and the lingering scent of fresh bread. A large wooden table dominated the center of the room, its surface marked by years of meal preparation and family gatherings. Windows on 2 walls let in abundant light, making the space feel airy despite its size. "Sit yourself down," Mrs. Patterson instructed, pulling out a sturdy chair. "I've got stew warming on the stove, and there's cornbread from this morning's baking." Ayanna perched carefully on the edge of the chair, afraid her weight might break it. She'd grown cautious about furniture over the years, having suffered the humiliation of broken chairs and creaking benches more times than she cared to remember. Mrs. Patterson ladled thick beef stew into a large bowl, the steam carrying the rich scent of herbs and vegetables. She set it before Ayanna, along with a generous slice of golden cornbread, then poured a tall glass of fresh milk. "There now. Eat up. A body can't think properly on an empty stomach." The stew was magnificent. Tender chunks of beef swam in savory broth with carrots, potatoes, and onions that had been cooked to perfect tenderness. The cornbread was sweet and crumbly, melting on her tongue like a prayer answered. Ayanna tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out and she found herself devouring the meal with embarrassing enthusiasm. Samuel sat across from her with his own bowl, eating at a more measured pace. "Mrs. Patterson is the finest cook in the 3 counties, he said. "I was skin and bones when she arrived. Now look at me." "Flatterer," Mrs. Patterson snorted, but Ayanna could see she was pleased. "The boy was living on hardtack and jerky when I got here. Barely knew how to boil water without burning it." "Still don't, if we're being honest," Samuel admitted with a grin. The easy banter between them surprised Ayanna. In her experience, relationships between employers and servants were marked by formality and distance. But Samuel and Mrs. Patterson spoke to each other with the comfortable familiarity of family members. "Now then," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her own chair with a cup of coffee. "Samuel tells me you'll be helping around the house and farm. What kind of work are you used to?" Ayanna set down her spoon, suddenly self-conscious. "I helped my grandmother with healing herbs and tending gardens. I can cook some, though not as well as this. I'm strong enough for heavy work, if that's needed." "Healing herbs, you say?" Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose with interest. "That's useful knowledge. I've been doctoring folks around here with what little I know, but proper herb lore is always welcome. My grandmother taught me about plants that ease pain and fever," Ayanna said cautiously. "Some for women's troubles too, though I'm still learning." "Excellent. We get plenty of folks coming by with ailments, especially during harvest season when injuries are common. It'll be good to have someone with real training." The conversation continued in this vein, with Mrs. Patterson asking practical questions about Ayanna's skills and experience. There was no mention of the circumstances that had brought her here, no probing into her painful history. Just a straightforward assessment of how she might fit into the household's rhythms. After the meal, Mrs. Patterson led Ayanna upstairs to show her the room that would be hers. It was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in a quilted spread, a washstand with basin and pitcher, and a window overlooking the vegetable garden. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Patterson said, "but it's clean and private. There's a trunk at the foot of the bed for your belongings." Ayanna stared at the room in wonder. She'd expected to sleep in a barn or cellar, somewhere befitting her purchase status. This looked like a room for a valued member of the household. "I don't have any belongings," she admitted quietly. "Well, we'll fix that. I've got some dresses that might work with a bit of alteration. You're taller than me, but we're probably close enough in other measurements that we can make do." Mrs. Patterson bustled over to a cedar chest in the corner and began pulling out garments. "This blue one should suit you. And this brown calico is sturdy for work days. Here, try this on and see how it fits." She handed Ayanna a dress of deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers scattered across the fabric. It was simple but well made, with mother-of-pearl buttons and careful stitching. "I'll step out while you change. There's soap and water for washing, and clean linens in the chest if you want to freshen up." Alone in the room, Ayanna slowly removed her torn buckskin dress. She caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand and winced. Her hair was matted and dirty, her face gaunt from poor eating, her body marked with bruises from the rough journey. She looked like exactly what she was, a refugee who'd lost everything. The blue dress fit surprisingly well, though it was snug across her chest and hips. Mrs. Patterson had been generous in her assessment of their similar measurements. But the fabric was soft against her skin, and wearing clean clothes made her feel more human than she had in months. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "May I come in?" Mrs. Patterson's voice called. "Yes, ma'am." The older woman entered and surveyed Ayanna with a critical but kind eye. "Much better. The color suits you. We'll need to let out the seams a bit, but that's easily done." She approached with a brush and began working on Ayanna's tangled hair with patient, gentle strokes. It was such a simple act of care, but Ayanna felt tears threatening. When was the last time someone had brushed her hair? Her grandmother, probably. Months ago in their mountain cabin. "You have beautiful hair," Mrs. Patterson murmured. "Thick and healthy. Once we get it properly clean and brushed out, it'll be lovely." "It's too much," Ayanna whispered. "All of this. The room, the clothes, the kindness. I don't understand why you're being so good to me." Double quotes. Mrs. Patterson's hand stilled for a moment. "What do you mean, child?" "I was sold like livestock this morning. Mr. Hartwell bought me at auction. I know what that means, what I am now, but you're treating me like—" She struggled for words. "Like I matter. Oh, honey." Mrs. Patterson set down the brush and came around to face her. "Is that what you think? That you're some kind of property?" Ayanna nodded miserably. "Well, you can put that notion right out of your head. Samuel Hartwell doesn't own people, and he never would. Whatever legal nonsense happened at that auction, it doesn't change what you are, a young woman who deserves respect and kindness. But he paid for me. He paid money to get you away from men who would have hurt you. There's a difference." Mrs. Patterson's voice was firm but gentle. "Samuel's got a good heart, sometimes too good for his own good. He sees someone in trouble, and he can't help but try to fix it." She resumed brushing Ayanna's hair with long, soothing strokes. 3 years ago, he found me crying outside the church in town. My husband had just died, left me with debts and no way to pay them. I was about to lose my house and had nowhere to go. Samuel offered me this job even though he didn't really need a housekeeper. Said a house this big was too lonesome for one person anyway. So he rescued you too, in a way. But it's not charity, mind you. I work hard for my wages, and I've made this place a proper home. It's a fair arrangement that benefits us both." She began braiding Ayanna's now smooth hair. "Same as it'll be with you. You'll earn your keep, but you'll be treated right." A commotion in the yard below drew their attention to the window. Samuel was unhitching the wagon horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones as he led them toward the barn. A dog, a large, shaggy creature of uncertain breeding, bounded around, his feet in excitement. "That's Bear," Mrs. Patterson said, following Ayanna's gaze. "Ugliest dog you ever saw, but loyal as they come. Samuel found him half dead on the road 2 winters ago, nursed him back to health. Now you can't pry the two of them apart. He collects strays, Ayanna observed. I suppose he does. But we're not strays anymore, are we? We're family. Family. The word sent a pang through Ayanna's chest. She'd thought that was lost to her forever when her grandmother died. Come on, Mrs. Patterson said, finishing the braid and tying it with a blue ribbon that matched the dress. Let's get you properly introduced to the place. There's a lot to see, and if you're going to be working here, you'll need to know how everything operates. They spent the rest of the afternoon touring the farm. It was larger than Ayanna had realized from the road, with fields of corn and wheat, a large vegetable garden, an orchard heavy with young fruit, and pastures where cattle and horses grazed peacefully. Everything was well maintained and thoughtfully organized. Samuel inherited this place from his uncle 5 years ago, Mrs. Patterson explained as they walked between the garden rows. The old man died with no children of his own, left it to Samuel since he was the only family member who'd ever shown interest in farming. Where did Samuel come from originally? Pennsylvania. His family had a small farm there, but it wasn't enough to support all the boys. Samuel was the youngest of 4 sons, so he struck out on his own when he came of age. Worked as a hired hand for years before his uncle took him in. They paused beside a pen where several pigs wallowed contentedly in the mud. He's done well with the place. Added that new barn last year, expanded the fields, improved the breeding stock. Got a good head for farming, and the patience for it too. What about his family? Does he ever see them? Mrs. Patterson's expression grew thoughtful. He writes letters, but it's been 3 years since any of them visited. I think they don't quite know what to make of him choosing to stay out here in the wilderness. His brothers all married and settled near the old homestead. They probably think he's wasting his life on this frontier farm. Do you think he's lonely? Oh, I know he is. A man his age should have a wife and children, not just an old housekeeper and a one-eyed dog for company. But he's particular about people, Samuel is. Won't settle for just anyone. They continued their tour, with Mrs. Patterson pointing out the smokehouse, the root cellar, the chicken coop, and the workshop where Samuel made repairs and crafted furniture during the winter months. Everything spoke of a man who took pride in his work and planned for the future. As evening approached, they returned to the house to find Samuel washing up at the pump behind the kitchen. He'd changed from his town clothes into work clothes, canvas trousers and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The physical labor of farm life had built impressive muscle on his large frame, but his movements remained gentle and controlled. How was the grand tour? He asked, drying his hands on a towel. Educational, Ayanna replied. You have a beautiful farm. Thank you. It's taken a lot of work to get it this way, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished. We? Mrs. Patterson snorted. Listen to him. Like I had nothing to do with those fields and barns. You've done plenty, Samuel protested. A farm's not just crops and livestock. It's having a place that feels like home, and you've made this house a home. The easy affection between them made Ayanna's chest tight with longing. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something, to belong somewhere. Dinner was a simple but satisfying affair of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans from the garden. They ate by lamplight as the sun set beyond the windows. The conversation flowing naturally between farm business, local news, and gentle teasing. Mrs. Patterson thinks I should get a milk cow, Samuel said, passing the bowl of potatoes to Ayanna. Says it's wasteful to buy milk from the neighbors, when we could produce our own. It is wasteful, the housekeeper retorted, and expensive. A good milk cow would pay for herself in 6 months. I know, but I've never been good with dairy animals. Somehow I always manage to upset them. Because you're too big and too loud, Mrs. Patterson said. You stomp around like a bear in the barn. Cows need gentle handling. Maybe Ayanna could help with that, Samuel suggested, glancing at her hopefully. Did you and your grandmother keep animals? A few chickens and a goat, Ayanna said. My grandmother said animals respond to calm energy. She could gentle any creature just by speaking softly to it. There, you see? Mrs. Patterson looked triumphant. The girl has experience. We should definitely get that cow. I suppose I'm outnumbered, Samuel said with a laugh. Fine, we'll look into getting a milk cow. But if she kicks me, I'm holding you both responsible. After dinner, they sat on the front porch as night settled over the farm. Lightning bugs blinked among the garden flowers, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called mournfully. The air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and new grass. It's peaceful here, Ayanna said quietly. It is, Samuel agreed. Sometimes almost too peaceful. A man can get used to the quiet, start to forget there's a whole world out there beyond these hills. Is that why you went to town today? To remember the world? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Partly, but mostly I went because Mrs. Patterson asked me to pick up supplies, and I heard there might be people at the auction who needed help. People like me. People like all of us, at one time or another. Everyone needs help sometimes, Ayanna. The trick is recognizing when you're in a position to give it. Mrs. Patterson rose from her chair and stretched. While I'm in bed. Morning comes early on a farm, and there's bread to bake before the sun's up. She paused beside Ayanna's chair. Sleep well, child. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you the routines around here. Thank you, Ayanna said, for everything. I don't know how to repay such kindness. No need to repay anything. Just be yourself, work hard, and help us make this place a little less lonesome. That's enough payment. After Mrs. Patterson went inside, Samuel and Ayanna sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the farm. Bear appeared from his evening patrol and settled at Samuel's feet with a contented sigh. Are you really going to tear up those auction papers? Ayanna asked eventually. Already did. You saw me do it. But legally. Legally, you're a free woman who's chosen to work for wages on my farm. That's all anyone needs to know. What if someone comes looking for me? What if that traitor realizes what you've done? Samuel's voice grew hard. Let them try. This is Arkansas's territory, and I'm a landowner with legal standing. No one's going to take you from here against your will. His certainty was comforting, but Ayanna couldn't quite shake her fear. She'd learned that safety was a fragile thing, easily shattered by men with power and bad intentions. I know you're scared, Samuel said gently. After what you've been through. It would be strange if you weren't. But I meant what I said earlier. You're safe here for as long as you want to stay. What if I'm not what you need? What if I can't do the work properly? Then we'll figure it out together. Mrs. Patterson and I aren't expecting miracles, Ayanna. We're just hoping for an honest effort. The moon was rising over the eastern hills, casting silver light across the farmyard. In that gentle illumination, everything looked enchanted. The garden flowers nodding in the breeze, the barn standing solid and protective, the house with its warm yellow windows promising shelter and belonging. I used to dream about places like this, Ayanna admitted, when I was little before everything changed. I'd imagine living somewhere peaceful, where people were kind and no one went hungry. What changed your mind about dreams? Reality, I suppose. I learned that dreams are dangerous things for people like me. People like you? She gestured at herself. Fat Cherokee girls with no family and no prospects. Dreams are luxuries I can't afford. Samuel turned in his chair to face her fully. Ayanna, listen to me. You are not just a fat Cherokee girl. You're a woman with knowledge of healing, with strength and resilience that has carried you through unimaginable hardship. You've survived things that would have broken weaker people. That makes you remarkable, not worthless. Tears burned behind her eyes. You don't really know me yet. Maybe not. But I know what I saw today at that auction. Someone who deserved better than what the world was offering. And I know what I see now, someone who's been told lies about her own worth for so long that she started to believe them. What if the lies are true? Then I guess we'll find out together, won't we? But I'm betting they're not. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant against the darkness. Ayanna watched it fade and found herself making a wish for the first time in years. Not for escape or survival, but for the courage to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could belong. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there." Samuel smiled, and in the moonlight his face looked gentle and hopeful. "That's what family does, Ayanna. We help each other remember who we really are." The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to Ayanna's life that she'd never experienced before. Each morning began with the rooster's crow and Mrs. Patterson's gentle knock on her door, followed by the comforting sounds of breakfast preparation downstairs. The work was steady but not backbreaking, tending the vegetable garden, helping with laundry, learning to churn butter and preserve vegetables for winter. But it was the small moments that surprised her most. Samuel leaves wildflowers on the kitchen table because he'd noticed her admiring them during their walks. Mrs. Patterson taught her to read recipes and write simple words in English script. The way Bear would seek her out for belly rubs, having decided she was part of his pack worth protecting. 3 weeks into her new life, Samuel announced at breakfast that they were taking a trip to town. "We need supplies for the harvest season," he explained, spreading jam on his biscuit. "And Dr. Morrison has been asking about meeting our new herb woman." Ayanna's stomach clenched. She hadn't been back to town since the auction, hadn't faced the stares and whispers of people who remembered seeing her sold like livestock. "I don't think that's wise," she said quietly. "People will talk. Let them talk," Mrs. Patterson snorted. "You're a respectable woman working an honest job. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer me. Besides," Samuel added gently, "Dr. Morrison is a good man. He's been the only doctor for 50 miles around, doing his best with limited supplies. If you could share some of your grandmother's knowledge with him, it might help a lot of people." The trip to town proved less traumatic than Ayanna had feared. A few people stared, but most were too busy with their own affairs to pay much attention to Samuel's companions. Dr. Morrison turned out to be a kind, elderly man with genuine enthusiasm for herbal medicine. "Most of what I know comes from books," he admitted as they talked in his small office above the general store. "But practical knowledge passed down through generations, that's invaluable." Ayanna found herself opening up as they discussed different plants and their uses. She demonstrated how to prepare willow bark tea for pain relief and shared her grandmother's recipe for a poultice that drew infection from wounds. "Remarkable," Dr. Morrison murmured, taking careful notes. "Would you be willing to help me prepare some of these remedies? I could pay you for your time, and it would give people in this area access to treatments they've never had before." "I'd like that," Ayanna said, surprising herself with her eagerness. On the ride home, Samuel was unusually quiet. Finally, Ayanna asked what was troubling him. "Nothing's troubling me," he said. "I was just thinking about how you lit up back there. Talking with Dr. Morrison, you have a gift, Ayanna. It's good to see you using it. My grandmother always said healing was sacred work, that we have a responsibility to help when we can. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. I just wish ... double quotes, Ayanna's voice trailed off. "What do you wish for? That she could see me now. That she could know I found somewhere safe." Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop beside a meadow dotted with late summer flowers. "Tell me about her. What was she like?" So Ayanna did. She spoke of her grandmother's gentle hands and patient teaching, of winter evenings spent learning stories and songs, of the old woman's unshakable faith that the Creator had a plan for everyone. even those the world seemed to have forgotten. She sounds like she and Mrs. Patterson would have gotten along, Samuel said with a smile. I think so too. They both have that way of making people feel like they matter. Is that how you feel here? Does it matter to you? Ayanna considered the question carefully. Yes, she said finally. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere. Good, because you do belong here, Ayanna. More than you know. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was a warmth in his eyes that sent an unfamiliar flutter through her chest. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Patterson, who watched their interactions with the shrewd eyes of a woman who'd seen enough of life to recognize love when it was blooming. That boy's smitten, she declared one afternoon as she and Ayanna worked together in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for canning. Who? Ayanna asked, though her cheeks flushed because she knew exactly who. Don't play coy with me, child. Samuel's been walking around with a foolish grin for days now, and he finds excuses to be wherever you're working. It was true. Samuel had taken to joining them for afternoon tea, helping with garden chores that didn't really require his assistance, and lingering at the dinner table long after the meal was finished just to continue their conversations. I think you're imagining things, Ayanna said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then explain why he spent an hour yesterday trying to fix that garden gate that's been squeaking for months, right while you were weeding the nearby flower beds. Ayanna couldn't explain it, because she'd noticed the same thing. Samuel's presence had become a constant comfort. His attention focused on her in ways that made her feel beautiful despite what the mirror told her. Even if it's true, she said quietly, nothing can come of it. We're too different. Different how? You're both kind, hardworking people who care about others. Seems to me that's what matters. I'm Cherokee, he's white. She gestured at her body, and well, look at him. Mrs. Patterson set down her paring knife and fixed Ayanna with a stern look. Now you listen to me, young lady. Samuel Hartwell doesn't give a fig about what color your skin is or what size dress you wear. That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, and any fool can see you feel the same way about him. It's not that simple. Why not? Because some people might disapprove. Child, there will always be people ready to disapprove of something. The question is whether you're going to let their small minds dictate your happiness. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel broached a subject that had been weighing on his mind. I've been thinking about expanding the herb garden, he said. Maybe setting up a proper drying shed so you can prepare medicines year-round. Dr. Morrison says there's real demand for that kind of work. That's very thoughtful, Ayanna replied. But it would cost money, and I'm not sure how much I could earn to justify the expense. It's not about the money. Well, not entirely. It's about giving you the tools to do work that means something to you. Why would you do that for me? Samuel was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Because I care about you, Ayanna, more than I probably should. Her heart began to race. Samuel ... I know it's complicated. I know there are obstacles. But I can't pretend anymore that I don't have feelings for you. This is impossible, she whispered. People will never accept it. Some people won't. But the people who matter, Mrs. Patterson, Dr. Morrison, the neighbors who've gotten to know you, they already accept you. They see what I see. What do you see? He turned to face her fully, his expression serious and tender. I see a woman who's beautiful inside and out. I see someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to be better, who brings light into this house just by being here. I see the woman I want to spend my life with, if she have me. Tears blurred Ayanna's vision. You don't understand what you're saying, the difficulties we'd face. I understand perfectly. But I also understand that some things are worth fighting for. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, but I'm more scared of losing you than I am of whatever challenges we might face together. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats broke the evening quiet. 3 riders approached from the main road, their faces hard to see in the growing darkness. Samuel stood immediately, his body tense with sudden alertness. "Go inside," he told Ayanna quietly. "Get Mrs. Patterson and stay away from the windows." "What's wrong? I don't know yet. But strangers riding up after dark usually aren't bringing good news." The riders pulled up at the edge of the porch light. The man in front was well-dressed but travel-worn, with the kind of cold eyes that Ayanna remembered from her worst nightmares. "Evening," he called out in a voice that carried false pleasantness. "Name's Blackwood. I'm looking for a Cherokee girl who was sold at auction here a few weeks back. I believe you might have purchased her." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What business is that of yours?" The original bill of sale was fraudulent. The girl was stolen property, and I represent the party who has legal claim to her services. Is that so? And who might that be? "A gentleman from Georgia who had a contract for her labor. When she disappeared from the wagon train, he lost a considerable investment." Ayanna's blood turned to ice. Someone had come looking for her, just as she'd feared. Someone who claimed to own her services, who would drag her back to the kind of life that had nearly destroyed her. Samuel stepped down from the porch, positioning himself between the riders and the house. "Well, Mr. Blackwood, I'm afraid you're mistaken. The young lady in question is a free woman working for wages. She's under my protection, and she's not going anywhere." "We'll see about that. I have legal documents that say otherwise. And I have a shotgun that says your documents don't mean much out here. This is my land, and these are my people. I suggest you move along before this conversation takes an unpleasant turn." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Inside the house, Ayanna pressed against the window, watching the confrontation with growing terror. She could see Mrs. Patterson moving quietly through the kitchen, and she knew the older woman was preparing for trouble. "This isn't over," Blackwood said finally. "We'll be back with proper authorities. You do that, and I'll be ready for you." The riders wheeled their horses and disappeared into the night, but their threat hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel returned to the porch to find Ayanna waiting for him, her face pale with fear. "They've found me," she whispered. "Hey." He gathered her into his arms, his voice gentle but firm. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I meant what I said. You're under my protection. You don't understand. If they have legal papers, then we'll fight them in court. We'll get our own lawyer. We'll do whatever it takes. Samuel, you could lose everything. Your farm, your reputation. And I could lose you if I don't fight. That's not acceptable." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, a rifle cradled in her arms. "Those men didn't look like the law-abiding type to me." "No, they didn't," Samuel agreed. "We need to be prepared for trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Ayanna asked. "The kind that comes in the middle of the night when decent folks are sleeping," Mrs. Patterson said grimly. "But don't you worry, child. We've faced worse than a few hired thugs." As they secured the house for the night, checking locks and loading weapons, Ayanna felt the fragile peace of the past weeks crumbling around her. Just when she'd begun to believe in happiness, the past had come calling with its cruel reminders of what she really was. But as she looked at Samuel's determined face and Mrs. Patterson's fierce loyalty, she realized something had changed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing danger alone. She had people willing to fight for her, people who saw her as worth protecting. That knowledge gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Whatever came next, she would face it not as a victim, but as a woman with something precious to defend. Dawn came gray and ominous, heavy clouds pressing low over the farm like a suffocating blanket. Ayanna had barely slept, every sound outside her window making her heart race. The confrontation with Blackwood had shattered the peaceful bubble she'd been living in. reminding her that safety was an illusion that could be stripped away at any moment. Mrs. Patterson was already in the kitchen when Ayanna came downstairs, her movements sharp with nervous energy as she prepared breakfast. Dark circles under her eyes revealed she'd slept no better than anyone else. "Samuel's been up since before sunrise," the older woman said without preamble. "Rode out to check the boundaries, make sure those men didn't try anything during the night. I should leave," Ayanna said quietly. "If I'm not here, they can't use me to hurt you and Samuel." Mrs. Patterson slammed a pan down on the stove with unnecessary force. "Don't you dare start talking about that foolishness. Running never solved anything except to make the hunters think you're guilty of something. But if they come back with authorities, then we'll face them together. You're part of this family now, Ayanna. We don't abandon our family." Samuel returned an hour later, mud on his boots and worry etched deep in the lines around his eyes. He accepted coffee and biscuits but barely touched the food, his attention focused on plans and preparations. "I'm riding to town this morning," he announced. "Need to speak with Judge Crenshaw about the legal situation. If Blackwood does have papers, we need to know what we're up against." "I'll come with you," Ayanna said immediately. "No, too dangerous. If they're watching the town." "Samuel, I won't hide while you risk yourself for me." His expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "Someone needs to stay here with Mrs. Patterson, and if something does happen to me, you'll need to be ready to run." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I hope not. But we have to be practical." Their argument was interrupted by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. This time it wasn't 3 men but a full dozen, led by a thin man in a black suit who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to having his orders followed. "That'll be Sheriff Daniels," Samuel muttered, recognizing the leader. "And that's not good." They gathered on the front porch, presenting a united front, despite the fear coursing through them all. Bear positioned himself at Samuel's side, hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Samuel Hartwell," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying the weight of official business. "I have here a warrant for the return of stolen property. Specifically, 1 Cherokee female unlawfully removed from a legal labor contract." "On whose authority?" Samuel demanded. "Federal court. In Little Rock, the complainant has documented proof of ownership and legal claim." He held up a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. "The girl is to be returned immediately to fulfill her contractual obligations." Ayanna's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Federal court meant resources and power far beyond what they could fight. It meant the full weight of the government backing Blackwood's claims. "I'd like to see those documents," Samuel said. "You can read them after we've completed our business." "Miss, step forward." When Ayanna didn't move, 2 of the men dismounted and started toward the porch. Samuel moved to block them, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Easy there, Hartwell," the sheriff warned. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Interfering with federal marshals is a serious crime. So is kidnapping free citizens. The court has determined she's not a free citizen. She's contracted labor, same as an indentured servant. Now step aside before I have to arrest you for obstruction." The standoff stretched taut as a wire, everyone aware that the next few seconds would determine whether this ended peacefully or in bloodshed. Ayanna could see the calculations running through Samuel's mind, weighing their chances against a dozen armed men with legal authority behind them. "It's all right," she said quietly, stepping forward. "I'll go." "No," Samuel whirled to face her. "We can fight this." You can't fight the federal government, Samuel. And I won't let you die trying." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady. This was the sacrifice she'd known would come eventually, the price of her brief taste of happiness. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you for everything. Samuel ... She looked into his eyes one last time, memorizing the pain and love she saw there. remember me kindly." The marshals moved quickly, binding her hands and loading her into their wagon before Samuel could mount any kind of rescue attempt. As they pulled away from the farm, Ayanna looked back to see him standing on the porch, fists clenched and face twisted with anguish. She'd found love only to lose it. Found home only to be torn away. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She was right back where she'd started, a piece of property being transferred from one owner to another. The journey south took 3 days of hard travel. Blackwood rode alongside the wagon occasionally, making comments about her attitude adjustment and the proper discipline she'd receive at her destination. The other men treated her with casual cruelty, as if she were livestock that happened to be capable of understanding their insults. "Should have stayed where you belonged," one of them said during a rest stop. "Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Ayanna said nothing. She'd learned long ago that responding to cruelty only invited more of it. Instead, she retreated inside herself, holding tight to memories of Samuel's gentle hands and Mrs. Patterson's kindness. On the second night, camped beside a muddy creek, she overheard Blackwood talking to the sheriff about their destination. "Crawford's plantation is one of the biggest in Georgia," he was saying. "He's got specific uses in mind for this one. Field work mostly, but she's got some kind of medical knowledge that might be useful. What if she refuses to cooperate?" Blackwood's laugh was cold and ugly. "Oh, she cooperate. Crawford has ways of ensuring compliance. Breaking rebellious spirits is something of a specialty of his." The words sent ice through Ayanna's veins. She'd heard whispers about places like Crawford's plantation, where human beings were worked to death and replaced like broken tools. The thought of spending whatever remained of her life in such a place filled her with a despair so deep it threatened to drown her. But beneath the despair, something else stirred, anger, not just at Blackwood and his lies, but at herself for giving up so easily. Samuel had been willing to fight for her, and she'd walked away without even trying to resist. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "The Creator gave you strength for a reason, little bear. Don't waste it by accepting defeat before the battle is truly lost." On the third night, as they made camp in a grove of pine trees, opportunity presented itself. The guards had grown careless, confident that a lone Cherokee woman posed no threat to a dozen armed men. Only one stayed awake to watch her while the others slept around their dying fire. The guard was young and inexperienced, more interested in staring at the stars than keeping close watch on his prisoner. When he dozed off near midnight, Ayanna began working at her bonds with the rough edge of a stone she'd palmed during their evening rest. It took an hour of careful, silent effort, but eventually the ropes loosened enough for her to slip free. Moving with the stealth her grandmother had taught her during hunting trips, she gathered what supplies she could: a water skin, some dried meat, a blanket, and melted into the forest darkness. She ran through the night, following deer paths and creek beds, using every skill she'd learned as a child in the Tennessee mountains. Behind her, she could hear shouting as the guards discovered her escape, but the darkness and her knowledge of wilderness survival gave her crucial advantages out by dawn. She was miles away and moving fast toward what she hoped was north. She had no clear plan beyond putting distance between herself and her captors, but for the first time in days, she felt something resembling hope. Samuel was out there somewhere, probably searching for her. Mrs. Patterson was waiting, keeping her room ready for her return. And despite everything that had happened, despite all the obstacles they faced, Ayanna realized she wasn't ready to give up on the possibility of love. She'd tasted freedom and found it sweet. Now she was going to fight to keep it, no matter what the cost. The hunt was on, and this time she wasn't going quietly into whatever hell they'd planned for her. This time she was going home, 3 days after Ayanna's escape. Samuel found her. She was huddled beneath a rocky overhang beside a stream, exhausted and shivering despite the late summer heat. Her stolen clothes were torn from pushing through brambles, her feet bloody from walking in thin-soled boots not meant for wilderness travel. But her eyes blazed with a fierce determination that made Samuel's heart soar even as his protective instincts roared to life. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as he knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms. "I've been searching since the moment they took you," he murmured against her hair. "Mrs. Patterson sent word to every friend and ally we have. Half the county's been looking for you." Behind him, 3 other men emerged from the forest: Dr. Morrison, Judge Crenshaw, and Tom Bradley, a grizzled former mountain man who knew these woods better than anyone. All of them had dropped everything to join the search when Samuel put out the call. "The girl needs food and medical attention," Dr. Morrison said, approaching with his medical bag. "But first we need to get her somewhere safe. Those federal marshals won't give up easily." "Blackwood's got a bounty on her now," Tom added grimly. $500 for her return, dead or alive. That kind of money brings out the worst in men. Judge Crenshaw, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, knelt beside Ayanna with surprising gentleness. "Miss, I've been examining those federal documents. There are irregularities that suggest fraud, but proving it will take time we may not have." "What kind of irregularities?" Samuel asked. "The signatures don't match known samples, the court seal appears to be forged, and the timing doesn't align with federal court schedules. Someone went to considerable expense to create convincing forgeries." Ayanna struggled to sit up straighter. "Then this Crawford person doesn't really own me." "I don't believe so. But until we can prove the documents are fake, they carry legal." "Wait, we need to keep you hidden while we build our case." "Where can we go?" Samuel asked. "Blackwood knows about the farm now." Tom Bradley spat tobacco juice into the underbrush. "I know a place. Old Cherokee settlement up in the hills has been abandoned since the removal. Caves and hidden valleys that most white folks don't know about. We could hold out there for weeks if necessary." "That's where we'll go then," Samuel decided. "How long will you need to prove the documents are forged, Judge?" "Give me a week. I have contacts in Little Rock who can verify court records. If these papers are fake, I'll have proof." They made their way through the forest in single file, Tom leading them along paths that seemed invisible to anyone not raised in these hills. Ayanna rode behind Samuel on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, drawing strength from his solid presence. The abandoned Cherokee settlement was more intact than she'd expected. Hidden in a narrow valley between steep hills, it consisted of several log cabins and stone structures built around natural caves. Vines and new growth had reclaimed much of it, but the bones of a once thriving community remained. "My people built this place over 50 years ago," Tom explained as they explored the site. "Was a trading post and rest stop for folks traveling between the territories. When the government forced the Cherokee west, it just died." Ayanna felt a deep sadness walking among the empty buildings. She could almost hear the echoes of children playing, women singing while they worked, men discussing the day's business. Another piece of her people's history erased by policies that saw them as obstacles to progress. "We'll make it live again, for a little while," Dr. Morrison said gently, understanding her emotions. "Your presence here honors those who came before." They spent the afternoon making the largest cabin habitable. Samuel and Tom repaired the roof while Dr. Morrison and Judge Crenshaw gathered firewood and cleaned out the interior. Ayanna, despite protests about her needing rest, insisted on helping prepare meals and organize their supplies. As evening fell, they gathered around a carefully hidden fire to plan their next moves. Judge Crenshaw would return to town in the morning to begin his investigation into the forged documents. Dr. Morrison would spread word that Ayanna was safely hidden and rally support among their allies. Tom would stay to provide security and knowledge of the terrain. "What about me?" Samuel asked. I'm not leaving Ayanna alone again. You can't stay, Judge Crenshaw said firmly. Your absence will be noticed. If you disappear at the same time as Ayanna's escape, it'll confirm you're involved in helping her. I don't care what people think. You should care what a federal judge thinks when he's deciding whether to charge you with aiding a fugitive, the older man replied. We need you free and clear to help fight this legally. Ayanna reached for Samuel's hand. He's right, you have to go back. I just found you again. I'm not leaving you in some cave to hide like a criminal. I'm not hiding like a criminal. I'm hiding like a woman who refuses to be enslaved. Her voice was stronger than it had been. In days, this is where I need to be right now, Samuel. But knowing you're safe and working to clear my name, that's what will give me hope. The argument continued late into the night, with Samuel growing more agitated as the reality of another separation sank in. Finally, Tom Bradley spoke up with the authority of someone who'd survived decades in a dangerous country. Boy, you're thinking with your heart instead of your head. That's gonna get the girl killed. Samuel whirled on him. What's that supposed to mean? Means if Blackwood catches you up here, he'll know exactly where she is. Means if you're charged as a fugitive, you can't help her when she needs it most. Means sometimes loving someone requires doing the thing that tears your guts out. The words hit home with brutal clarity. Samuel slumped against the cabin wall, the fight going out of him. I hate this, he said quietly. So do I, Ayanna replied. But it's temporary. We just have to survive long enough for the truth to come out. And if it doesn't, if Judge Crenshaw can't prove those documents are forged, then we'll find another way. But we don't give up, Samuel. Not ever. The next morning brought the painful scene of another goodbye, though this one felt different from their forced separation. This time they were choosing to part temporarily as part of a plan to reunite permanently. Still, watching Samuel ride away with Dr. Morrison and Judge Crenshaw left Ayanna feeling hollow and afraid. He'll be back, Tom said, settling beside the cave entrance with his rifle across his knees. That boy's got it bad for you, girl. Seen lots of men in love, but never seen one willing to risk what he's risking. What if I'm not worth the risk? Tom studied her with eyes that had seen enough of the world to judge character accurately. You escaped from a dozen armed men using nothing but grit and determination. You're sitting in these hills planning to fight the federal government, rather than accept slavery. I'd say you're worth considerable risk. Sometimes I feel like I'm cursed. Everyone who cares about me ends up in danger. That ain't curse, girl. That's love. Real love always comes with risk. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept it when it's offered. The days that followed tested everyone's resolve. Judge Crenshaw sent word through Dr. Morrison that his investigation was progressing, but slowly. The forged documents were sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection, requiring detailed analysis by experts in Little Rock. Meanwhile, Blackwood had increased his search efforts, bringing in professional trackers and offering larger rewards. Twice, Tom had to lead Ayanna deeper into the cave system as searchers passed uncomfortably close to their hiding place. They're getting desperate, Tom observed after the second near miss. Desperate men make mistakes, but they also take bigger risks. On the fifth day, Samuel appeared at the cave entrance just after dawn, moving with the silent urgency that meant trouble. They're coming, he said without preamble. Blackwood found someone who knows these hills. They'll be here within hours. How many? Tom asked, already gathering his gear. 20 men, maybe more. They mean to end this today. Ayanna felt her heart sink. 20 armed men against Tom's single rifle and whatever weapons Samuel carried. The odds were impossible. There's another way out of these caves, Tom said. Old Cherokee tunnel that leads to the river valley. But it's dangerous. Flooding, cave-ins, places where you have to crawl on your belly for hundreds of yards. Better than facing Blackwood's army. Samuel replied. As they prepared to abandon their refuge, Ayanna realized something had changed in her during these days of hiding. The frightened girl who'd been sold at auction was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than freedom. "Whatever happens," she told Samuel as they prepared to enter the tunnel, "I want you to know I don't regret any of this. Loving you, being loved by you, it's worth fighting for." He kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of promise. "We're going to survive this, Ayanna. All of it. And when we do, I'm going to marry you if you'll have me." "Yes," she whispered. Against his lips, yes to all of it. Behind them, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. Ahead lay the dark tunnel and an uncertain future. But for the first time since this ordeal began, Ayanna felt ready to face whatever came next. She was done running. It was time to fight. The underground tunnel was a nightmare of jagged rock and suffocating darkness. Ayanna crawled through passages so narrow that her shoulders scraped against stone walls, her breathing echoing eerily in the confined space. Behind her, Samuel's larger frame struggled even more, his broad shoulders barely fitting through openings that Cherokee builders had carved for smaller bodies. "Lie ahead," Tom whispered from the front of their desperate procession. The river's closed now. They emerged into gray morning light beside a rushing creek that fed into the Arkansas River. The tunnel exit was cleverly hidden behind a waterfall, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Tom had led them through 3 miles of underground passages, navigating by memory and instinct through a route he'd learned from Cherokee friends decades earlier. "Boats are downstream about half a mile," he said, checking his rifle and scanning the surrounding forest. "If we can reach them without being spotted, ... The words died in his throat as riders appeared on the opposite bank. Blackwood sat on his horse like a general surveying a battlefield, his face twisted with cold satisfaction. Beside him rode Sheriff Daniels and nearly 24 armed men, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. "Well, well," Blackwood called across the water. "The rabbit finally breaks cover." Samuel stepped protectively in front of Ayanna, his hand moving to his pistol. "How did you find us so fast?" "Simple. I've been watching every route out of those hills for days." "Did you really think 3 people could disappear without a trace?" Blackwood's smile was predatory. "Now then, Miss Cherokee, you've caused quite enough trouble. Time to come along quietly." "She's not going anywhere," Samuel growled. "Oh, but she is. You see, I've grown tired of this game. My employer has authorized me to use any means necessary to retrieve his property." At Blackwood's signal, several men raised rifles, their barrels trained on the trio by the waterfall. The message was clear: surrender or die. "You're bluffing," Tom said. "Kill us, and you have nothing to show for all this effort. Kill you and him, certainly. But the girl only needs to be breathing when I deliver her. A few bullet wounds might actually improve her attitude." Ayanna felt ice in her veins. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of men who enjoyed causing pain. Blackwood wasn't just following orders anymore. This had become personal for him. "There's another option," she said quietly, stepping forward despite Samuel's attempt to hold her back. "Ayanna, no," Samuel whispered. "Let her speak," Blackwood said, his voice silky with anticipation. "I'll come with you willingly if you let them go unharmed. Your quarrel is with me, not with them. How noble. But I'm afraid it's too late for noble gestures. Your friend Hartwell has interfered with federal business, aided a fugitive, and cost me considerable time and money. He'll face justice for his crimes." "What justice?" Samuel demanded. "You mean a bullet in the back? Accidents happen during apprehension of dangerous fugitives." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 20 rifles against 3 people with nowhere to run. Ayanna could see the calculations running through Tom's weathered face, the old mountain man weighing their chances and finding them wanting. That's when the miracle happened. The sound came first, a deep, rhythmic drumming that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Then figures began emerging from the forest on both sides of the creek. Cherokee men and women, dozens of them, moving with the silent grace of people who belonged to this land in ways the white intruders never could dot at their head, walked. A man Ayanna recognized from her childhood, Joseph Ridge, a Cherokee leader, who'd refused to sign the removal treaties and had been living as an outlaw in these hills ever since. His presence here could only mean one thing. "You are trespassing on Cherokee territory," Ridge announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Despite speaking to armed federal marshals, you will leave immediately." Sheriff Daniels shifted nervously in his saddle. "This is federal business. We have jurisdiction here. Your jurisdiction ended when you entered lands that were never legally ceded. These hills belong to my people. By treaty rights, your government has chosen to ignore." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. Treaties signed by savages have no legal standing. The temperature of the confrontation dropped several degrees. Cherokee warriors notched arrows and raised rifle barrels with fluid precision. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of position and intimate knowledge of the terrain. "I suggest you reconsider your choice of words," Ridge said quietly, "and your choice of actions." "You can't protect them forever," Blackwood snarled. "This girl is legally bound property. The law will find her eventually, perhaps, but it will not find her today." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke from a forest fire. Then Sheriff Daniels, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation, raised his hand for his men to lower their weapons. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he said. "But I won't start a war with the Cherokee over a runaway girl." "You're making a mistake, Sheriff. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Blackwood's face contorted with rage, but he was pragmatic enough to recognize when he was outmaneuvered. With visible effort, he reined in his temper and wheeled his horse around. "Mark my words, girl," he called across the water. "I'll find you again. And next time, there won't be any cavalry coming to save you." The federal posse rode away, but their departure felt more like a tactical retreat than a true victory. As soon as they were out of sight, Ridge crossed the creek on foot, moving with the easy balance of someone who'd spent his life navigating wilderness. "Ayanna Blackfeather," he said, using a Cherokee name she hadn't heard since childhood. "Your grandmother spoke of you often before she passed. You knew her?" "She was my cousin. When word reached us of your troubles, we felt obligated to help." Tears blurred Ayanna's vision. Even in death, her grandmother was protecting her, reaching out through family connections to provide aid when she needed it most. "How many of you are there?" Samuel asked, clearly amazed by the Cherokee force that had materialized from seemingly empty forest. "Enough," Ridge replied simply. "We've been living in these hills since the removal, keeping to the old ways. Your government believes we went west with the others, so they leave us alone. Can you keep Ayanna safe?" Ridge studied Samuel with eyes that missed nothing. "You're the one she speaks of. The giant who treats her with kindness. I'm the man who loves her and will do anything to protect her." "Good, but protection requires more than good intentions. It requires preparation for war." "War?" Blackwood represents powerful interests. Men who see Cherokee people as obstacles to profit. They won't stop coming simply because we frightened them today. Tom Bradley nodded grimly. "He's right. That bounty hunter type doesn't give up easy. He'll be back with more men and better plans. Then we need to end this permanently," Ayanna said. "No more running, no more hiding. We find a way to destroy those forged documents and expose Blackwood for what he is. How do you propose to do that?" Ridge asked. Before she could answer, Dr. Morrison appeared through the trees, riding hard and looking triumphant. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled from hard travel. "Judge Crenshaw did it," he called out before he'd even dismounted. He proved the documents are forgeries. Not only that, he traced them back to a criminal organization that's been selling fraudulent labor contracts across 3 states. The relief that washed over Ayanna was so intense she nearly collapsed. It's over? Not quite. Blackwood and his associates are now federal fugitives, but they don't know that yet. Judge Crenshaw wants to set a trap, use the fact that they still think they have legal authority to draw them into the open where they can be arrested. What kind of trap? Samuel asked. Dr. Morrison's smile was grim. The kind that requires bait. Specifically, it requires Ayanna to appear vulnerable and alone, so they'll make their move. Absolutely not, Samuel said immediately. She's not being used as bait for anything. It's the only way to end this safely, Dr. Morrison insisted. Otherwise, they'll keep coming. They'll find new forged documents, new legal pretexts. The only permanent solution is to put them in federal prison where they belong. Ridge nodded. Slowly, the doctor speaks wisdom. Sometimes the hunted must become the hunter. Ayanna looked around at the faces of the people who'd risked everything to protect her. Samuel with his fierce love, Tom with his mountain wisdom, Dr. Morrison with his determined loyalty, Ridge with his ancestral obligation. They'd all sacrificed for her safety, and now it was time for her to take the final risk. I'll do it, she said quietly. Ayanna, Samuel started. No arguments, this is my choice to make. She turned to Dr. Morrison. What exactly does Judge Crenshaw need me to do? As they began planning what would either be Ayanna's liberation or her doom, storm clouds gathered overhead. The breaking point had arrived, and everything they'd fought for would be decided in the next few hours. One way or another, this nightmare was about to end. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Ayanna would return to the original trading post where her nightmare had begun, appearing to be alone and defenseless. Judge Crenshaw had spread word through carefully chosen channels that she'd been abandoned by her protectors and was seeking passage back to Cherokee territory. The bait was irresistible. Blackwood could complete his contract and claim his reward, while eliminating the witnesses who'd caused him so much trouble. What Blackwood wouldn't know was that the trading post would be surrounded by federal marshals, Cherokee warriors, and armed citizens who'd grown tired of seeing innocent people terrorized by men like him. You don't have to do this, Samuel said for the 100th time as they prepared for what everyone hoped would be the final confrontation. They stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the town, sharing what might be their last moments together. Yes, I do, Ayanna replied, adjusting the worn dress that made her look like a desperate refugee. This is the only way to end it permanently. Otherwise, we'll spend our whole lives looking over our shoulders. I can't bear the thought of losing you. She reached up to touch his face, memorizing the strong jaw, the gentle eyes that had seen her worth when no one else could. You won't lose me. I'm not the same frightened girl who was sold at that auction 3 months ago. I know who I am now, Samuel. I know what I'm worth, and I know what I'm fighting for. The trading post sat in a valley between rolling hills, exactly as Ayanna remembered from that terrible morning that had changed her life. But now, instead of feeling like a victim approaching her doom, she walked toward it with the confidence of a woman who discovered her own strength. She took her position beside the livestock pens where she'd once waited in terror. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was choosing to return to the place of her greatest humiliation in order to claim her freedom. Her grandmother would have appreciated the symbolic justice of it. The wait wasn't long. Blackwood appeared with a dozen men just as the sun crested the eastern hills, their horses kicking up dust as they rode hard toward what they believed was an easy capture. Well, well, Blackwood called out as he dismounted, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. The little rabbit returns to the trap. How convenient. I'm tired of running, Ayanna said, letting exhaustion color her voice. I just want this to be over. Oh, it will be over soon enough. Crawford's been quite explicit about what happens to runaway property. His smile was as cruel as winter. But first, I have some questions about your friend Hartwell and that Cherokee band that's been harboring you. They abandoned me, she lied convincingly. Said I was in too much trouble. Smart of them. Though it won't save them from federal justice. Blackwood signaled his men to surround her, but he made the mistake of approaching close enough to gloat. Did you really think you could defy me indefinitely? I've been hunting fugitives for 20 years, girl. You're nothing special. You're right, Ayanna said quietly. I'm not special, but I am free. The signal came as she spoke the word, free, a Cherokee war cry that echoed from the hills around the trading post. Suddenly the valley filled with armed men emerging from concealment. Federal marshals, Cherokee warriors, local farmers and shopkeepers who'd grown disgusted with Blackwood's reign of terror. You're under arrest, Judge Crenshaw announced, stepping into view with a badge gleaming on his vest. Federal charges of fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit slavery. Blackwood's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, rage, calculation, and finally desperate cunning. His hand moved toward his pistol, but froze as rifle barrels swung in his direction from a dozen different angles. This is a setup, he snarled. Yes, it is, Judge Crenshaw agreed pleasantly, and you walked right into it. You have no authority. Here, I'm operating under a federal warrant. Forged federal warrant. We have documentation proving you and your associates have been creating fraudulent legal papers to facilitate human trafficking. The real federal government takes a very dim view of that. For a moment, it seemed like Blackwood might surrender. Then his expression shifted to something feral and desperate. If I'm going down, the Cherokee bitch comes with me. He lunged for Ayanna with a knife that appeared in his hand like magic. But he'd made a critical error. He'd forgotten about the gentle giant who loved her. Samuel exploded from his concealment behind the trading post building like an avalanche given human form. His massive fist connected with Blackwood's jaw with a sound like a tree branch snapping. The bounty hunter went down hard and didn't get up. The rest of Blackwood's men, seeing their leader unconscious and surrounded by overwhelming force, surrendered without further resistance. Within minutes they were all in chains, their weapons confiscated, and their reign of terror ended. Is it really over? Ayanna asked as Samuel gathered her into his arms. It's over, Judge Crenshaw confirmed. The criminal organization behind these forged contracts has been dismantled. You're free, Miss Ayanna. Completely and legally free. The words hit her like a physical force. Free. Not hiding, not running, not looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Simply free to choose her own path. What happens now? She whispered. Now, Samuel said, dropping to one knee right there in the dust beside the livestock pens. You marry me if you'll have me. Not because you need protection. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I love you and want to spend my life making you happy. He pulled a ring from his pocket, not the simple leather band he'd offered before, but a proper gold band set with a small but brilliant diamond. I had it made in town while you were hiding in the hills, he explained. Mrs. Patterson helped me pick it out. She said it needed to be worthy of the woman who taught me what real love looks like. Through her tears, Ayanna saw the crowd of people who'd risked everything to ensure this moment could happen. Dr. Morrison beaming with paternal pride. Tom Bradley grinning and wiping his eyes with a bandana. Joseph Ridge nodded with quiet approval. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd with a basket of celebratory food she'd somehow prepared, despite the early hour. Yes, Ayanna said, her voice carrying across the valley like a bell. Yes, Samuel. Hartwell, I'll marry you. The cheer that went up from the assembled crowd could probably be heard in the next county. Cherokee war cries mixed with frontier whoops and civilized applause in a joyous cacophony that spoke to the many different communities that had come together to ensure justice prevailed. 6 months later, the Hartwell farm hummed with life and purpose. The herb garden Samuel had promised was now a reality, with organized rows of medicinal plants and a proper drying shed where Ayanna prepared remedies for people throughout the region. Dr. Morrison had become a regular visitor, learning traditional Cherokee healing methods while sharing his medical knowledge in return. The house itself had been expanded with a new wing that served as a clinic where Ayanna treated patients 3 days a week. Word of her skills had spread far beyond the local area, and people traveled for days to seek her help. She'd become what her grandmother had always told her she could be, a bridge between worlds, bringing healing to those who needed it regardless of their race or station in life. Mrs. Patterson had taken on an apprentice, a young Cherokee girl named Mary, whose family had been displaced during the removals. The girl was quick and eager to learn, and she reminded Ayanna poignantly of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge and acceptance. "She's got good hands for healing," Ayanna observed one morning as she watched Mary carefully grinding herbs under Mrs. Patterson's supervision. "Get it from you," Samuel said, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind. "You've become the teacher your grandmother was. I hope so. She always said knowledge should be shared, not hoarded." Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the arrival of a travel-worn rider bearing an official-looking letter. Samuel accepted it with the wariness that still occasionally surfaced when dealing with government correspondence. "It's from the territorial governor," he said, breaking the seal and scanning the contents. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "He's offering you an official position as territorial medical advisor for Cherokee affairs." Ayanna took the letter and read it carefully. The position would involve traveling to Cherokee communities throughout the territory, documenting traditional healing practices, and training local healers to serve their people more effectively. It was exactly the kind of work her grandmother would have encouraged her to pursue. "It's a wonderful opportunity," she said thoughtfully, "but it would mean time away from home, away from the practice we've built here. What does your heart tell you?" She looked around at the life they'd created together, the bustling clinic, the thriving farm, the community of friends and patients who depended on them. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of having. "My heart tells me that home isn't a place," she said finally. "It's the people who love you and the work that gives your life meaning. We could do this together, Samuel. You could manage the agricultural aspects of helping displaced communities while I focus on the medical needs. A traveling husband and wife team? Mrs. Patterson would never forgive us for abandoning her. Who says we'd abandon her? Look at that letter again." Samuel reread the document and laughed. "It includes provisions for support staff and medical assistants. Mrs. Patterson would love bossing around a whole team of helpers instead of just us. And Mary could come as my apprentice. It would give her training she could never get staying in one place. When do we leave? We don't have to decide today." "But Samuel, this could help so many people. Communities that lost their healers during the removals. People who are trying to preserve traditional knowledge before it's lost forever. Then we'll do it, all of it. Whatever you need to become the healer you're meant to be." That evening, they gathered their extended family around the dinner table to discuss the opportunity. Mrs. Patterson was immediately enthusiastic about the prospect of a larger operation to manage. Tom Bradley volunteered to help with the traveling logistics, claiming he'd grown too comfortable in civilization and needed some wilderness time. Dr. Morrison offered to establish a network of correspondences with physicians throughout the territory to ensure they'd have medical support wherever their work took them. "Sounds like we're all going on an adventure," Mary said shyly, speaking up for the first time during the discussion. "The best kind of adventure," Ayanna agreed. "One where we get to help people and stay together as a family." As the planning session continued late into the night, Ayanna stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The stars were brilliant, in the clear Arkansas sky, and she could hear the familiar sounds of the farm settling into peaceful rest. A year ago, she'd been a piece of property sold at auction, convinced she was worthless and unloved. Tonight, she was a respected healer, a beloved wife, and a woman with the opportunity to serve her people in ways her grandmother would have been proud of. The transformation wasn't just in her circumstances, it was in her soul. She'd learned to see herself through the eyes of people who loved her rather than those who sought to diminish her. She discovered that strength came not from meeting other people's expectations, but from knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less. Samuel appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist in the comfortable gesture that had become second nature. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "About what?" "Any of it. The danger, the uncertainty, choosing to fight instead of accepting what the world said you deserved." Ayanna considered the question seriously. The path that had led her here had been painful and dangerous. There had been moments when she'd thought she might not survive, when the cruelty of others had nearly broken her spirit. But every challenge had also been an opportunity to discover her own resilience, and every act of kindness had taught her something new about love. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Every moment led me here, to this life, to you, to the work I'm meant to do. I wouldn't change any of it. Even being sold at auction like livestock. Especially that, because that's where you found me. That's where this all began." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and planning their future. In the distance, a nightbird called, not mournfully, but with the clear, strong voice of something that belonged exactly where it was. "I love you, Ayanna Hartwell," Samuel murmured. "I love you too. All of you, all of this, all of what we're going to build together." Behind them, the house glowed with warm light from the windows, where their chosen family continued planning their next chapter. Ahead lay a territory full of people who needed healing, communities that could benefit from their combined skills, and adventures they could only imagine. But most importantly, they had each other. The gentle giant who had seen worth in a broken Cherokee girl, and the woman who had learned to see herself through his loving eyes. Together, they had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. The fat Cherokee girl who had been sold with livestock had become a healer, a wife, a teacher, and a force for good in a world that desperately needed more kindness. And the gentle giant who had treated her like a princess had discovered that love, real love, was indeed worth fighting for. Their story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. And somewhere in the star-filled Arkansas sky, an old Cherokee woman's spirit smiled, knowing that her granddaughter had finally found her way home to herself. The transformation was complete. But the healing would continue for as long as there were people who needed it, and hearts brave enough to provide it. 2 years later, the Hartwell Medical Mission had become legendary throughout the territory. Their traveling clinic had visited 43 Cherokee communities, training over 200 local healers and documenting traditional remedies that might otherwise have been lost forever. Ayanna's reputation had spread far beyond the Cherokee Nation. White settlers, freed slaves, and immigrant families all sought her help when conventional medicine failed them. The wagon train that had once carried her to bondage now carried hope to scattered communities. 3 covered wagons formed their mobile clinic, one for medical supplies and equipment, one serving as living quarters for the team, and one converted into a treatment space where Ayanna could see patients regardless of whether Mrs. Patterson had proven unexpectedly adept at managing their complex logistics, negotiating with suppliers, and coordinating with local officials across multiple territories. Her sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude had opened doors that diplomatic niceties couldn't budge. "That woman in Fort Smith tried to charge us double for bandages," she reported indignantly after their latest supply run. "I told her if she thought she could cheat medical missionaries, she had another thing coming. Got our regular price plus a discount for future orders." Mary had blossomed under Ayana's tutelage, developing an intuitive understanding of herbal medicine that rivaled healers twice her age. More importantly, she'd gained confidence in herself and pride in her Cherokee heritage. Where once she'd tried to hide her identity to avoid persecution, now she wore traditional patterns in her dresses and spoke Cherokee fluently with the elders they encountered. The grandmother in Tahlequah knew 17 different uses for willow bark, Mary reported excitedly after their latest visit. She taught me a song that helps remember the proper preparation methods. Dr. Morrison had officially joined their mission full-time after his practice in Arkansas was taken over by a younger physician. At 68, he claimed this was the most meaningful work of his career. In town, I treated the same complaints week after week, he explained to Samuel as they set up camp beside a creek in the Washita Mountains. Gout from too much rich food, hysteria from too little purpose. Out here, we're literally saving lives and preserving knowledge that's irreplaceable. Tom Bradley had appointed himself their scout and quartermaster, riding ahead to identify safe camping spots and negotiate with local authorities. His weathered face and easy manner opened conversations with frontier folks who might otherwise view their mission with suspicion. Cherokee healing woman coming through, he'd announce in saloons and trading posts. Saved my life twice over, and I've seen her work miracles others couldn't touch. Y'all got any sick folks that regular doctors can't help? The stories that emerged from these encounters filled Ayana with a purpose she'd never imagined possible. The settler woman whose infected wound wouldn't heal until Ayana applied a poultice of wild ginger and golden seal. The freed slave whose persistent cough disappeared after treatment with cherry bark tea and healing songs. The immigrant child burning with fever who recovered completely after 3 days of careful nursing with traditional Cherokee remedies. But it wasn't just the medical work that mattered. Everywhere they traveled, Ayana found herself serving as a bridge between communities that had little contact with each other. White settlers learned to respect Cherokee knowledge and traditions. Cherokee families discovered that not all white people were enemies bent on their destruction. Former slaves found common ground with Native Americans who understood displacement and persecution. You're building something bigger than a medical practice, Samuel observed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky above a Cherokee settlement where they'd spent the week training local healers. You're building understanding between peoples who've been taught to fear each other. My grandmother always said healing was about more than medicine, Ayana replied, leaning against his shoulder as they sat on a fallen log overlooking the valley. She said the deepest wounds are in the spirit, and those can only be healed through connection and compassion. Their personal life had flourished alongside their professional mission. The constant travel and shared purpose had deepened their bond in ways that staying on the farm never could have. They'd learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other through the challenges of frontier medicine. Samuel had discovered unexpected talents as a medical assistant, his gentle manner with patients, and steady hands during procedures, making him invaluable in the clinic. His size, which had once intimidated people, now provided comfort to families dealing with serious illnesses. Big Sam, as the Cherokee children called him, had become a beloved figure who could calm frightened patients and provide the physical strength needed for difficult treatments. More than once, his ability to carry injured people to safety had meant the difference between life and death. Their marriage had weathered the tests of constant travel, financial uncertainty, and the emotional toll of dealing with suffering on a daily basis. If anything, these challenges had made them stronger, more grateful for each other, and more committed to their shared vision. Do you ever miss the quiet life on the farm? Samuel asked one particularly difficult day when they've lost a patient despite their best efforts. Sometimes, Ayana admitted. But then I think about all the people we wouldn't have helped, all the knowledge that would have been lost, all the connections that wouldn't have been made. This is what we're meant to do, Samuel. Together. The territorial government had taken notice of their success, offering increased funding and official recognition for their work. Governor Harrison himself had written a letter praising their invaluable service to the citizens of Arkansas's territory, regardless of race or origin. But recognition brought new challenges. Government bureaucrats wanted to formalize their operations, imposing regulations that might limit their flexibility to help those who needed it most. Political pressures emerged from settlers who objected to savage medicine being legitimized by territorial support. They want us to register all our remedies with the Territorial Medical Board, Dr. Morrison reported after a meeting with officials in Little Rock. Prove their effectiveness according to their standards before we can continue using them. How do you prove the effectiveness of a healing song? Mary asked indignantly. How do you document the power of ceremony and spiritual connection? You can't, Ayanna said firmly. Which is exactly what they're counting on. If we can't prove it their way, they can ban it entirely. The challenge threatened everything they'd built. Cherokee healing traditions had been passed down through generations of oral tradition, validated by centuries of successful treatment rather than written documentation. Forcing them to meet European medical standards would effectively eliminate most traditional practices. We need a different approach, Samuel suggested. What if we document our successes in their language while preserving the traditional knowledge in ours? The solution they developed was innovative and practical. Dr. Morrison began keeping detailed medical records in standard format, documenting symptoms, treatments, and outcomes in language that satisfied government requirements. Meanwhile, Ayanna and Mary maintained parallel records in Cherokee, preserving the spiritual and cultural context that gave the healing its full power. Two systems, one truth, as Ayanna described it. We give them what they need to justify our work, while ensuring the real knowledge survives intact. The strategy worked brilliantly. Government officials got their documentation, while Cherokee communities retained their traditional practices. More importantly, the dual system created a bridge between medical traditions that had never been connected before. Young Cherokee healers learned to speak to white doctors in terms they could understand, while white physicians gained respect for traditional knowledge they'd previously dismissed as superstition. The combination proved more powerful than either system alone. As their third year of travel began, Ayanna discovered she was pregnant. The news brought both joy and challenges. How could they continue their demanding mission while raising a child on the road? We'll figure it out, Samuel said confidently, his hands resting protectively on her still flat belly. Mrs. Patterson raised 5 children while running a boarding house. Mary was practically raised by her entire village. This baby will have more family than most children ever dream of. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite their nomadic lifestyle. Cherokee women had been traveling during pregnancy for generations, and traditional knowledge helped Ayanna maintain her health while continuing to work. The expectant child became a source of excitement for the communities they visited, with elders offering blessings and advice for the baby's future. A child born to this work will be special, predicted an elderly Cherokee healer named Anna Sixkiller. Born between worlds with medicine in her blood and healing in her destiny. Her? Ayanna asked with a smile. Oh yes. Girls carry the medicine forward. This one will carry it farther than you can imagine. The prediction proved accurate when Ayanna gave birth to a daughter on a starlit night beside the Buffalo River. The labor was attended by Mary, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 Cherokee midwives who'd come specifically to help with the birth. Samuel paced outside their makeshift birth-in tent, alternately praying and cursing his inability to help. She's perfect, Mrs. Patterson announced, emerging with a red-faced, angry bundle that was making her feelings about the world abundantly clear. Strong lungs, all her fingers and toes, and already reaching for her mama. They named her Sequoia Rose, Sequoia for the Cherokee inventor of the syllabary. Rose for Samuel's grandmother who'd taught him about gentleness and strength. From her first days, the baby seemed to understand she belonged to more than just her parents. Cherokee grandmothers took turns holding her while Ayanna worked. Mrs. Patterson invented songs to keep her entertained during long wagon rides. Tom Bradley carved toys from whatever wood was available. Dr. Morrison diagnosed every sniffle with grandfatherly concern. "She's going to grow up thinking the whole world is her family," Samuel observed, watching Mary teach 3-month-old Sequoia Cherokee lullabies. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Ayanna replied. "Imagine if everyone grew up believing they belonged to the human family instead of just their own tribe." The baby's presence changed their mission in unexpected ways. Families who might have been suspicious of unmarried healers welcomed them warmly when they arrived with an infant. Children who were frightened of medical procedures calmed down when they could watch the baby while being treated. Sequoia became an ambassador for their work, breaking down barriers with her innocent charm. As the years passed, their traveling clinic evolved into something unprecedented in the territory, a mobile university where traditional and modern medicine merged into something greater than either could be alone. Students came from across the country to study with them, including the children and grandchildren of people they'd helped in their early years. The fat Cherokee girl who'd been sold like livestock had become a teacher, whose influence stretched across multiple territories. The gentle giant who'd treated her like a princess had become a respected healer in his own right, bridging cultural divides with his quiet strength and unwavering compassion. But perhaps most importantly, they'd created a new model for how different peoples could work together. In a time when most contact between cultures involved conflict and exploitation, they'd proven that cooperation and mutual respect could achieve extraordinary results. Their love story had become a legend told around campfires and in Cherokee councils, inspiring other couples to look beyond race and social expectations to find genuine connection. The message was simple but revolutionary. Love sees the person, not the category. Worth comes from character, not circumstance. Healing happens when people choose understanding over fear, standing together beside the wagon that had carried hope. To hundreds of communities, watching their daughter take her first steps in the grass beside a mountain stream, Ayanna and Samuel knew their transformation was complete. They'd become exactly who they were meant to be, not in spite of their trials, but because of them. The gentle giant still treated her like a princess, but now she knew she was actually a queen. And together, they ruled over a kingdom of healing that knew no boundaries of race, religion, or social standing. In that kingdom, every person mattered, every life had value, and love was the medicine that cured the deepest wounds of all. 5 years after Sequoia Rose's birth, their traveling mission had evolved into something neither Ayanna nor Samuel could have imagined in their early days together. What had begun as a desperate escape from persecution had transformed into the foundation of a new kind of medical practice that was being studied and replicated across the American frontier. The territorial capital had established the Hartwell Institute for Traditional Medicine, a permanent facility where healers from multiple tribes could come to teach, learn, and preserve their ancestral knowledge. Ayanna served as its director while maintaining her traveling clinic, creating a network of trained healers who could serve communities throughout the expanding territories. "We've received applications from as far away as California and the Oregon Territory," reported James Whitehorse, a young Cherokee man who joined their mission as an administrator after completing his education at a white college. "Word has spread that we're not just preserving traditional medicine, but proving its effectiveness using methods the government understands." The Institute had become a beacon for indigenous peoples across North America who were struggling to maintain their cultural practices in the face of forced assimilation. Lakota medicine men traveled from the northern plains to share their knowledge of healing ceremonies, Seminole healers brought their expertise with medicinal plants from Florida swamplands. Pueblo curanderas contributed their understanding of spiritual healing practices. "What we've created here is unprecedented," Dr. Morrison observed during one of their quarterly planning meetings. "A place where traditional knowledge is not just preserved, but actively advanced through collaboration between tribal healers who might never have met otherwise." Sequoia Rose, now an energetic 5-year-old who spoke Cherokee, English, and scattered words from a dozen other tribal languages, had become the unofficial ambassador of the Institute. She could recite healing songs in 4 different traditions and had an uncanny ability to identify medicinal plants during their nature walks. "Mama, the willow trees are sad today," she announced one morning, tugging on Ayana's skirt. "Their bark says the old woman with the swollen hands is coming back." Sure enough, Martha Henderson arrived that afternoon, seeking relief for the arthritis that had been plaguing her for months. Sequoia's intuitive connection to the natural world constantly amazed the healers, suggesting she'd inherited something even deeper than her parents' medical knowledge. Samuel had grown into his role as the Institute's operations manager with the same quiet competence he'd once applied to farming. His ability to navigate both Cherokee and white bureaucracies had proven invaluable in securing funding and official recognition for their work. More importantly, his unwavering support had allowed Ayana to pursue her calling without worrying about practical concerns. "The Bureau of Indian Affairs wants to send observers," he reported after returning from a meeting in Little Rock. "They're finally acknowledging that traditional medicine might have value beyond what they call primitive superstition. Observers are welcome, as long as they understand they're guests in our house," Ayana replied firmly. "We won't change our methods to accommodate their ignorance." The challenge of working with government officials while maintaining the integrity of traditional practices required constant vigilance. Every advance in recognition brought new attempts to control or commercialize indigenous knowledge. Ayana had learned to be diplomatic but immovable when it came to protecting sacred aspects of healing that weren't meant to be shared with outsiders. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but as sharp as ever, had become the Institute's chief financial officer and fiercest guardian of its independence. Her ability to intimidate government bureaucrats and private investors alike had protected their mission from numerous attempts at exploitation. "That railroad company thinks they can buy exclusive rights to our pain remedies," she reported indignantly, after a particularly frustrating negotiation. "I told them if they wanted to profit from Cherokee medicine, they could start by not running their trains through sacred burial grounds." Mary had emerged as one of the most respected healers in the territory, her combination of traditional knowledge and modern documentation methods making her a sought-after teacher and consultant. She'd married a young man from the Cherokee Nation and was raising 2 children who spoke their native language fluently while also receiving formal education. "My grandmother died without being able to pass down her knowledge because there was no one left to teach," Mary reflected during a quiet moment after treating a difficult case. "Now my children will grow up in a world where being Cherokee is something to be proud of, not something to hide." Tom Bradley had officially retired from scouting, but remained a constant presence around the Institute, regaling visitors with stories of their early adventures and serving as an informal ambassador to the white frontier community. His weathered face and authentic manner lent credibility to their work among settlers who might otherwise be skeptical of Indian medicine. "Seeing that Cherokee woman work miracles that would make you weep," he'd tell anyone who'd listen. "Saved my life more times than I can count, and I've watched her do the same for hundreds of others. Don't matter what color your skin is or what god you pray to, healing's healing. And she's got more of it in her little finger than most doctors have in their whole bodies." The Institute had also become a center for legal advocacy, working to protect indigenous land rights and medical practices from encroachment by expanding white settlements. Samuel's connections in territorial government, combined with Judge Crenshaw's continued support, had helped establish important precedents for tribal sovereignty in medical matters. "We've won 3 major cases this year," reported their legal advocate, a Cherokee attorney named Ross Ridge, who was Joseph Ridge's nephew. "The courts are beginning to recognize that traditional healing practices are protected under tribal sovereignty rights, not subject to territorial medical licensing requirements." These legal victories had far-reaching implications beyond their immediate work. By establishing the legitimacy of traditional medicine in territorial courts, they'd created a framework that other indigenous communities could use to protect their own healing practices. But the most meaningful measure of their success wasn't found in legal precedents or government recognition. It was in the lives they'd touched and the healers they'd trained. Graduates of their programs were now working throughout the American frontier, bringing Cherokee healing methods to communities that had never experienced their power. "I received a letter from California yesterday," Ayanna shared during one of their family dinners. "One of our students has established a healing practice among the gold miners there. She's treating injuries and illnesses that conventional doctors have been unable to help. And remember Thomas Wolfkiller?" Samuel added, "He's working with the Army surgeon at Fort Gibson, teaching them about treating infected wounds with traditional poultices. Even the military is starting to recognize the value of what we're doing." These success stories filled Ayanna with a satisfaction deeper than any personal achievement could provide. Every healer they trained carried their influence into new territories and communities, multiplying their impact far beyond what they could accomplish alone. As evening fell over the Institute grounds, Ayanna and Samuel often walked the paths between the herb gardens and teaching buildings, marveling at what they built together. Students from dozens of tribes worked alongside white medical students, sharing knowledge that bridged cultural divides in ways that seemed impossible just a few years earlier. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Blackwood had succeeded?" Samuel asked one night as they watched Sequoia Rose chase fireflies in the garden. "I try not to," Ayanna replied honestly. "But sometimes I think about the people we wouldn't have helped, the knowledge that would have been lost, the bridges that wouldn't have been built. It makes me grateful for every moment we've had together. I'm grateful for all of it. Even the terrible parts that brought us together. Even me being sold like livestock. Especially that. Because that's when I saw who you really were. Not someone broken or worthless, but someone precious who'd been treated badly by people who couldn't see your true value." Their conversation was interrupted by Sequoia Rose running up to them, her hands cupped around something precious. "Look what I found," she exclaimed, opening her small palms to reveal a perfect white flower that glowed almost ethereally in the twilight. "That's a ghost flower," Ayanna said softly, recognizing the rare bloom that her grandmother had taught her about years ago. "Cherokee healers believe it appears when the ancestors want to send a message." "What message?" their daughter asked. With the serious curiosity that marked all her questions about healing, Ayanna looked around at the institute they'd built, the students they'd trained, the community they'd created, and the family they'd chosen. She thought about the girl who'd once believed she was worthless, and the woman who now knew she was invaluable. She remembered the gentle giant who'd seen her worth when no one else could, and the man who'd helped her discover she was strong enough to change the world. "I think," she said, gathering her daughter close, "the message is that love really can heal anything, if you're brave enough to believe in it." As stars emerged in the Arkansas sky, 3 generations of healers stood together in the garden they'd planted, tending to the growing things that would feed and heal countless people in the years to come. The fat Cherokee girl who'd been sold with livestock had become the grandmother of a healing tradition that would outlive them all. And the gentle giant who'd treated her like a princess had helped her build a kingdom where that treatment was the standard for everyone who entered their doors. The transformation wasn't just complete, it was eternal, living on in every life they'd touched and every healer they'd trained to carry their work forward into an uncertain but hope-filled future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.